He thought he was saving himself from a forced marriage, but instead, he saved someone else's entire life. Imagine this: a successful doctor, pressured by his family to marry someone he doesn't love. In a desperate act of freedom, he makes an unexpected decision that changes everything. This isn't just a love story, it's a story of humanity, destiny, and how sometimes the person who looks like they have nothing ends up giving you everything. When we look at someone like Dr. Ryan, it's easy to assume he had it all: success, wealth, admiration, and a bright future. On the surface, he was living the dream. But behind that polished white coat and confident smile, there was a man crushed by invisible chains, the expectations of tradition, family honor, and social image. You see, sometimes the greatest pressure doesn't come from failure. It comes from success, because once you're seen as the perfect son, society doesn't give you the freedom to be human anymore. Dr. Ryan grew up in a family where achievements were measured not by happiness but by reputation. His parents, deeply rooted in culture and status, believed that a marriage wasn't just a personal choice, it was a business alliance, a reflection of family pride. From the day he graduated medical school, the talk of marriage began like a ticking clock. His mother would bring up names of well-bred daughters from respected families, and his father would remind him that a man's duty is to marry right. But what does right really mean when it ignores love, emotion, and individuality? For Ryan, it felt like being trapped in a life, script written by someone else's hand. As the months passed, the conversations turned into commands. Every family dinner became a debate about his future, and every phone call carried the same question: when will you settle down? His parents had already chosen a woman for him, elegant, wealthy, and perfect on paper, but to Ryan, she was a stranger. There was no emotional connection, no spark, no shared dream. He felt suffocated by the weight of expectation, as if every smile he gave was just a mask to hide his fear of disappointing those he loved most. What made it harder was the guilt. Deep inside, Ryan didn't want to hurt his parents. They had sacrificed everything for his education and success. Saying no to them felt like betrayal, but saying yes meant betraying himself. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, torn between duty and desire, wondering if freedom was worth losing family approval. Many of us have faced similar moments when pleasing others means losing a part of ourselves. That quiet war between your heart and your obligations can break even the strongest soul. In his hospital life, Ryan was admired for his calmness and compassion, yet inside he was restless. Each day he healed others, but no one could heal the emptiness inside him. His patients would thank him for saving their lives, and his colleagues envied his success, but Ryan felt like a man drowning in his own achievements. Every award, every compliment, every smile from society felt hollow. Because how can you feel truly alive when your choices are not your own? It was as if his life was a beautifully decorated cage, gold on the outside, cold on the inside. Then came the breaking point. The date for his arranged marriage was set. Invitations were being printed. He could no longer pretend. Panic gripped him like a storm. He felt trapped in a destiny he never chose. The more he tried to reason with his parents, the more they accused him of being ungrateful. "This is for your own good." His father said, "You'll learn to love her." His mother insisted. But Ryan knew love could never be taught. It had to be felt. And in that moment, he realized something: life, changing sometimes. The bravest thing a person can do is walk away from what everyone else calls perfect. So, one night, standing outside his hospital after a long shift, Ryan made a decision that would shock everyone who knew him. It was impulsive, irrational, and wild, but for the first time in years, it felt real. As the cold wind brushed against his face and the city lights shimmered around him, he whispered to himself, "I won't let anyone choose my life for me." What he didn't know was that this act of rebellion would not only free him from his family's expectations, it would lead him to a woman who would change his definition of love, humanity, and destiny forever. Because pressure doesn't just reveal character, it forges it. And for Dr. Ryan, the weight of expectations didn't destroy him. It pushed him toward an unexpected truth that freedom, even when messy, is worth more than perfection built on lies. The night Ryan made his decision, the city was unusually quiet. The streets were glistening with the reflection of streetlights after a light drizzle, and his heart pounded as if it already knew that tonight would change everything. He walked with no destination, just the weight of years of silent rebellion pressing down on him. His mind echoed with the voices of his parents, the expectations of his family, and the invisible cage he had been living in. But under all that noise, there was another voice, softer, yet stronger, whispering, "You deserve to choose your own life." It was around midnight when he passed a small alley near the hospital where he worked. There he noticed a young woman sitting on the cold pavement, wrapped in a torn blanket. Her hair was messy, her hands trembling from the chill, but her eyes had a quiet strength that stopped him in his tracks. She wasn't begging or calling for help. She was simply existing, watching the world pass by without expecting anything from it. In that moment, Ryan saw something in her that mirrored his own pain, a person forgotten by the world, yet still holding on. For the first time in a long while, he felt a strange connection, not of romance, but of recognition. Here he was, a doctor with everything money could buy, yet emotionally bankrupt. And there she was, a woman with nothing but a heartbeat and dignity. Two souls at rock bottom in different ways, both invisible in a society obsessed with appearances. He walked toward her without thinking. Maybe it was fate, or maybe desperation, but that single step would alter the course of both their lives. He asked her name. Her voice was soft, hesitant, Lena. He offered her food from a nearby stall, and though she refused at first, her hunger gave her away. They sat together in silence, sharing a meal that felt strangely sacred. Ryan didn't see her as a homeless woman, he saw her as a person, a human being with a story untold. The more they spoke, the more he realized she wasn't broken, she was surviving. And that survival carried more courage than all his medical degrees combined. That night, something wild took over Ryan, a need to break free, to take control of his destiny, even if it meant chaos. He had spent years being the obedient son, the perfect doctor, the respectable man. But what had it earned him? Emptiness, fear, regret. And now, sitting beside Lena, he saw freedom, raw, imperfect, but real. In a sudden moment of clarity, he said the unthinkable, "Will you marry me?" Lena froze. Her eyes widened, confusion replacing the calm. "What are you saying?" she asked, almost laughing in disbelief. Ryan smiled faintly, knowing how insane it sounded, a man in a tailored coat proposing to a woman with no home, no possessions, no reason to trust him. But to him, it made perfect sense, because, he said quietly, "You have nothing to gain from me, and that's exactly why I can trust you." It wasn't love at first sight, it was liberation. He wasn't proposing out of romance, but rebellion. He needed a way out, a way to break the chain of expectations, and this was his escape plan disguised as marriage. But deep down, he also felt something more, a flicker of compassion, a silent hope that maybe this act of madness could mean something more than just defiance. The following morning, they went to the city registry office. The clerk looked at them with raised eyebrows, a doctor in a crisp shirt and a woman in worn-out clothes. People whispered, judged, and stared. But Ryan didn't care. For the first time, he wasn't living for anyone's approval. He was doing something completely his own, irrational, unapologetic, and breathtakingly free. When they signed the papers, he felt a strange peace wash over him. The pen left a trail of ink that would forever bind two lives the world would never have put together. After the ceremony, he looked at Lena and realized the magnitude of what he'd done. She was quiet, composed, and maybe even scared. He didn't blame her after all. He had just turned her world upside down too. They barely knew each other, yet fate had tied them in a way neither could have predicted. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see madness, she saw sincerity. And maybe, just maybe, she saw the same hunger for belonging that she'd been carrying all along. That night, when Ryan returned home, his phone buzzed endlessly. His parents had found out. They were furious, heartbroken, ashamed. They called it betrayal, disgrace, humiliation, but Ryan didn't answer. For once, he didn't need their validation. He stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker, and whispered to himself, "I did it." The words weren't triumphant, they were freeing. Because that's what a desperate act of freedom is. It's messy, misunderstood, and terrifying. But it's also the first breath of life after years of suffocation. Ryan didn't marry Lena out of love. He married her to escape a life that wasn't his. But what he didn't realize was that this act of rebellion would become the beginning of something far greater than freedom. It would become the beginning of truth. In the days that followed their unexpected marriage, Ryan's life felt like a movie he couldn't fully comprehend. Every morning, he would wake up and see Lena quiet, withdrawn, and uncertain, sitting by the window of the small apartment he had rented for her. She never complained, never asked for anything, and never demanded attention. She simply existed softly, humbly, and almost invisibly. To Ryan, she was still a mystery. He had married her impulsively, without knowing who she really was, and now he found himself wondering what kind of person she might be beyond the torn clothes and quiet eyes. At first, he thought he'd simply done a good deed, a charitable act that freed him from his parents' grip. He assumed Lena would be timid, fragile, and dependent, someone who would fade into the background while he continued his life as usual. But the truth began to reveal itself slowly, not through words, but through her actions. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. She had strength, the kind of strength that doesn't shout, but stands tall in silence. One morning, Ryan woke up to the sound of soft humming. The smell of freshly cooked food filled the room. When he entered the kitchen, he saw Lena carefully arranging plates on the table, humming a tune that was somehow both sad and soothing. It was the first time he had seen her smile, faintly but genuinely. She looked up and said, "You shouldn't leave without breakfast. It's bad for your health." Her tone was gentle yet firm, not the voice of someone seeking pity, but of someone who cared. For a moment, Ryan was speechless. It had been so long since someone had spoken to him with kindness rather than expectation. Over the next few weeks, Ryan noticed small but powerful things about Lena. She read books quietly in the evenings, sometimes old novels she found in the apartment or donated by neighbors. She was curious about everything from the world of medicine to the beauty of stars. She would ask questions that made Ryan pause and think deeply, questions no one had ever asked him before. Why do people save lives? She once asked, but forget to live their own. That question haunted him for days. But what moved Ryan the most wasn't her curiosity, it was her resilience. He discovered that Lena had been homeless for nearly 2 years. She had lost her parents in a car accident, and soon after, her small art studio, her only source of income, was destroyed in a fire. With no relatives and no savings, she ended up on the streets. Yet even then, she didn't beg. She painted murals on public walls in exchange for food. She taught street children how to draw with broken pencils and chalk. Even when the world turned its back on her, she found ways to give. That, Ryan realized, was strength, the kind that doesn't come from power or privilege, but from pain endured with grace. There were moments when Ryan felt ashamed of himself. He had thought of her as someone he was saving. But now he understood that she didn't need saving, she needed respect. She had faced storms he couldn't even imagine, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. In her eyes, there was no bitterness, no self-pity, just peace, a kind of peace Ryan had been chasing all his life, but never found in his success or status. She had nothing, yet she lived as if she had everything that mattered: freedom, gratitude, and faith. One evening, Ryan returned home late after a long surgery. Exhausted, frustrated, and mentally drained, he sank into the couch. Lena silently placed a cup of tea beside him and said, "You can save lives all day, but don't forget yours needs saving too." Her words were gentle, yet they cut deep. For the first time, Ryan broke down. All the walls he had built of pride, control, and ego began to crumble. And there she was, sitting beside him, not as a stranger or a burden, but as a presence that steadied him when he was falling apart. It was then that Ryan began to truly see her not as the homeless woman he married, but as the woman who carried wisdom that life had carved into her soul. Her quiet strength became his mirror. She showed him that love isn't always loud, and healing doesn't always come from medicine. Sometimes, it comes from the calm of someone who has already survived the worst. Through Lena, Ryan began to rediscover himself. She taught him that the world measures strength by success, but real strength lies in surviving without losing your heart. She showed him that compassion isn't about pity, it's about equality. And most of all, she reminded him that freedom isn't just breaking rules, it's finding peace within chaos. Ryan had once believed he married Lena to escape a forced marriage, but now he realized something far deeper. He hadn't chosen her by accident. Life had brought her to him as a lesson, because sometimes the people we least expect to change us become the ones who save us from ourselves. In the beginning, Ryan had thought of Lena as someone he needed to protect, someone fragile, someone beneath him in status but deserving of kindness. He didn't realize that what he called kindness was actually pity. He pitied her for being poor, homeless, and alone, while he was celebrated, educated, and admired. But time has a way of breaking illusions, and soon, that pity began to fade, replaced by something far more powerful and humbling: respect. Their days together were no longer silent. Lena began to speak more freely, and Ryan found himself listening not as a savior, but as a student. She had a perspective on life that no textbook could teach. She understood pain, but didn't let it define her. She had lost everything, yet still saw beauty in the smallest things: in a morning cup of tea, in sunlight falling through the curtains, in the laughter of a child outside their window. One morning, Ryan came home after a grueling night shift. His hands trembled from exhaustion, and his mind was cluttered with the weight of the lives he couldn't save. He sat in silence, staring at the floor, lost in guilt and self-doubt. Lena sat beside him without a word, letting the silence breathe between them. Then softly she said, "You can't carry the world on your shoulders. You can only carry kindness." Those words struck him deeper than any lecture or therapy session ever could. For the first time, Ryan didn't feel superior. He felt seen, understood in a way that transcended words. As days turned into weeks, their dynamic began to change. He no longer treated her as someone fragile or dependent. He began involving her in decisions, asking for her opinions about his day, his choices, his emotions. She, in turn, began to open up about her dreams, not as someone trying to survive, but as someone trying to live again. She started painting again, using small canvases and cheap colors Ryan bought for her. Each painting carried emotion, hope, and silent stories of resilience. Ryan would often watch her paint after work, her hands steady, her focus unwavering. There was something healing about it, something that reminded him of why he became a doctor in the first place: to heal what is broken, not just in bodies but in souls. Soon, their relationship took on a rhythm. It wasn't romantic in the fairy tale sense: no grand gestures, no roses, no candlelit dinners. It was quiet, real, and deeply human. Ryan began to admire the way Lena handled hardship. When the electricity went out, she laughed and lit candles. When he was frustrated at work, she reminded him that not all battles are meant to be won. Slowly, the walls between them crumbled. He no longer saw her as the woman he married to escape, but as the one person who made him feel at peace in his own skin. But the world wasn't as kind. His colleagues whispered behind his back. Some said he'd lost his mind, others accused him of ruining his reputation. His parents refused to speak to him. Invitations to social gatherings stopped coming. For the first time, Ryan was truly alone, stripped of approval, status, and validation. Yet, strangely, he didn't feel empty, because Lena was still there. She didn't try to fix his pain with words. She just stayed constant, calm, and loyal, and that silent companionship became his anchor. One night, after a particularly harsh confrontation with his father, Ryan came home angry. He threw his phone against the wall and shouted, "Why can't they understand me? Why can't they see that I'm happy?" Lena didn't flinch. She stood up, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, "Because you still want them to." Her honesty stunned him. She continued, "You don't need them to understand. You just need to understand yourself." That was the moment Ryan realized that Lena wasn't just someone in his life, she had become his mirror, reflecting back the truth he had long avoided. Their bond deepened through shared silence, shared pain, and shared growth. Ryan began to feel something new for her admiration, not for what she had endured, but for who she was. He admired her courage, her calmness, her wisdom. He found himself wanting to protect her, not out of pity, but out of love, the kind that comes from respect. He started noticing the small details, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was painting, the way she smiled at strangers, the way her presence could turn tension into peace. One evening, as she showed him one of her new paintings, a scene of a doctor holding a patient's hand under a fading sun, Ryan felt something shift inside him. It was no longer about escape, defiance, or rebellion. It was about connection, two people who had found each other not by chance, but by need. In Lena's strength, Ryan rediscovered his own, and in his vulnerability, she found safety. What began as a marriage born out of desperation had turned into a partnership built on mutual healing. They were no longer bound by circumstance, but united by choice. He had once thought she needed saving, but now he knew that it was she who had saved him. Time passed, and Ryan and Lena's quiet life began to settle into something resembling peace. Their days flowed with simplicity, laughter over coffee, long talks after sunset, the gentle comfort of knowing someone was always there. But beneath that calm, Ryan could feel a shadow, something unspoken, that lingered between them. Lena was open about many things, yet there was a part of her past she carefully avoided. Every time he asked about her life before the streets, her eyes would darken for a second, and she would softly change the subject. Ryan didn't press her. He had learned that everyone carries scars, some visible, some buried deep. Still, the curiosity lingered. Who was she before fate broke her down? What kind of life had she lived before ending up on a cold pavement with nothing but memories? He told himself it didn't matter, that what counted was the present, the person she had become. But a part of him couldn't silence that whisper of wonder. One rainy afternoon, that truth began to unravel by accident. Ryan had returned home early from the hospital. The sound of rain filled the apartment, and Lena wasn't in the living room as usual. He called out, but there was no answer. Then he noticed the door to the small storage room slightly ajar. When he stepped inside, he saw Lena sitting on the floor, surrounded by old art supplies, faded sketchbooks, brushes, and worn-out canvases. Tears streaked her face, not from sadness, but from something deeper, memory. Ryan knelt beside her, gently picking up a sketchbook lying open. The drawings were breathtaking portraits full of emotion, colors that spoke of pain and beauty intertwined. "These are yours?" he asked softly. She nodded, hesitating for a moment before whispering, "They're all I have left." That night, Lena finally told him her story, the story she had kept locked away for years. She had once been an artist with dreams as vivid as her paintings. Her work had been displayed in galleries, her name whispered in art circles, her future bright. She had parents who adored her, a fiancé who admired her talent, and a life filled with color and purpose. But fate can be cruel, and in a single moment, it can paint over everything you love. One night, her parents were driving back from her exhibition when tragedy struck, a car accident that took both their lives instantly. Her fiancé, unable to cope with the loss and the grief that consumed her, left her. The pain was unbearable, and yet, as if the universe hadn't done enough, a few months later, a fire broke out in her art studio. Everything she had ever created, years of her work, her identity, burned to ashes. It felt like life had taken away every reason to wake up. She said quietly, "So I stopped trying." Lena drifted through shelters and streets, surviving on little food and fading hope. The world that once celebrated her now looked past her as if she were invisible. "When you have nothing," she said, "people stop seeing you. You become background noise." Those words broke Ryan's heart. He had spent his life surrounded by people, admired by everyone, and yet he realized he too had never truly seen anyone until he met her. When she finished speaking, silence filled the room. The rain outside had stopped, but the weight of her story hung in the air like a storm that had just passed. Ryan didn't know what to say. No words could touch the depth of what she had endured. He simply took her hand and said, "You're the bravest person I've ever met." In that moment, he understood something profound. Lena wasn't broken. She was reborn. She had lost everything, yet still found the strength to stand, to love, to give. He realized how wrong he had been to think of her as a victim. She wasn't a victim of fate. She was a survivor of it. And perhaps the reason life had brought them together was so he could learn that survival isn't just about breathing, it's about finding light in darkness. From that day on, Ryan looked at her differently. Every gesture, every smile, every quiet thought she shared carried the weight of someone who had lived through the fire and come out glowing. He often caught himself staring at her paintings not just for their beauty, but for what they represented: pain transformed into art, tragedy into truth. He began to see how much they had in common. Both of them had lived under expectations, hers from tragedy, his from tradition. Both had lost themselves in different ways, and now both were rediscovering life through each other. The difference was, Lena had faced loss with courage, while he had faced privilege with fear. She had endured what he could never imagine, and instead of bitterness, she had chosen compassion. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He walked to her small art table and saw one unfinished canvas. It showed two figures, one dressed in white, the other wrapped in a simple shawl, standing together beneath a gray sky, holding each other's hands as sunlight broke through the clouds. It wasn't just a painting, it was their story. And as he stood there, tears in his eyes, Ryan finally understood the truth he had been blind to all along. Lena wasn't just part of his life. She was the reason he'd found meaning in it again. After that night, the night Lena finally shared her truth, something inside Ryan changed forever. It wasn't just sympathy or admiration anymore. It was awakening. For years, he had defined success by titles, wealth, and approval. But Lena's story shattered those illusions. He realized that love isn't built on perfection, it's born out of acceptance. The quiet decision to stand beside someone not because you have to, but because you choose to. Their home, once a place of silence and awkwardness, now glowed with laughter and meaning. Lena's paintings once again began to fill the walls, each canvas more alive than the last. She painted with colors that carried emotion, shades of pain and hope blended together. Sometimes Ryan would come home late and find her painting in the dim light, her eyes focused, her hands steady. "You've given me back my art," she would whisper. But what she didn't realize was that she had given him something even greater: his heart. Ryan had started to see the world through her eyes. He began volunteering at a local shelter, offering free checkups to those who couldn't afford care. Lena often joined him, helping distribute meals, talking to people, listening to their stories. Together, they became a team not bound by romance alone, but by purpose. He treated patients' wounds, and she healed their spirits with her words and sketches. It was no longer a marriage of convenience. It was a union of compassion. One evening, as they walked home from the shelter, Ryan turned to Lena and said, "Do you ever think we met for a reason?" She smiled, that gentle smile that always calmed him. "I think everything happens for a reason," she said softly, "even the pain, especially the pain." Those words echoed in his heart. All his life he had avoided pain, seeing it as weakness, but Lena had embraced it and turned it into strength. Through her, He learned that pain isn't the end, it's the bridge to understanding. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. His colleagues began to see a different side of Ryan. He was calmer, kinder, more present. Patients adored him not just for his skill, but for the compassion in his voice. He no longer rushed through his work, he listened, he connected. He had rediscovered the human side of medicine that he had lost somewhere in the race for perfection. When people asked what had changed him, he would smile and simply say, "Someone taught me how to see." But the most powerful transformation wasn't in his career, it was in his heart. Ryan, who had once married out of rebellion, had now fallen deeply, genuinely in love. He loved Lena not because of her beauty or her story, but because of the quiet strength she carried. She taught him that love isn't about rescuing someone, it's about walking beside them, hand in hand, through the ruins, until both hearts find peace. One day, Ryan decided to surprise her. He arranged a small art exhibition in the hospital's main hall, a tribute to Lena's work. The walls were lined with her paintings, faces of hope, hands holding hands, and hearts that refused to break. When Lena walked in, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, her art, her soul was being seen again. Doctors, patients, and visitors stopped to admire her work, touched by the emotion in every brushstroke. Ryan stood beside her, watching her glow with pride and disbelief. "You deserve this," he said softly. "You've reminded me what healing truly means." Lena turned to him, her eyes glistening. "You healed me too," she whispered. "Not with medicine, but with faith." And in that moment, Ryan realized that redemption doesn't come from escaping pain, it comes from embracing it, from turning brokenness into beauty. Their love was no fairy tale, it had been tested by reality, judgment, and fear. But that's what made it real. They had built something stronger than comfort, understanding. They didn't complete each other, they strengthened each other. She had taught him humility, and he had given her stability. Together, they had transformed a marriage of circumstance into a story of healing that neither could have written alone. Months later, Ryan's parents finally came to visit. At first, the air was tense. His mother's eyes were filled with uncertainty, his father's silence heavy with pride and regret. But then, as they looked around and saw Lena's paintings, the compassion, the humanity, the love in each piece, their expressions softened. His mother walked to one painting of two hands reaching through darkness and said quietly, "She paints with her soul." Ryan smiled. "That's because she lives with it." That evening, as his parents left, his father placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You chose well, son." It was a simple sentence, but to Ryan it meant everything. The approval he had once craved no longer defined him, but hearing it now, after finding his own truth, felt like closure. Later that night, Ryan and Lena stood on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "marrying me to escape?" He smiled and shook his head. "No," he said, "because what started as an escape became the only thing worth staying for." And in that silence, surrounded by the soft hum of life, Ryan realized the full circle of their journey. He had run from a marriage without love, only to find love in the most unexpected place. He had tried to save himself, and instead, he had found salvation in another soul. That is the power of love and redemption. It doesn't just change your circumstances. It transforms who you are. And so, in the end, the doctor who once ran from love found it in the one place no one expected, not in wealth, not in beauty, not in perfection, but in the soul of a woman the world had forgotten. He thought he was saving himself from a forced marriage, but instead, he saved a life that would, in turn, save his own. What began as an act of desperation became a journey of redemption. Because sometimes, destiny doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what you need. Lena taught Ryan that love isn't about background or status. It's about seeing someone when the world looks away. It's about kindness that costs nothing but changes everything. She showed him that true strength isn't loud, it's the quiet courage to keep living after life has broken you. And Ryan taught Lena that hope can rise again, that no matter how deep your scars, you can still create something beautiful out of them. Together, they proved that love is not found, it is built, piece by piece, through patience, forgiveness, and faith. So if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Sometimes, the people we think we're helping are actually the ones sent to heal us. Sometimes, the mistake we fear making becomes the miracle we never saw coming. And sometimes, the love that begins in chaos becomes the calm that saves your soul. Because real love doesn't follow rules. It finds you, rebuilds you, and reminds you that no life, no heart, no person is ever too broken to begin again.